Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here's the host of The Pleasure Zone, sensual movement artist, relationship and sex alchemist, Milica Jelenic.
Welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. For those of you who are listening today, it just always stuns and amazes me that I somehow come up with yet another topic I haven't talked about. And this is yet another topic I haven't talked about. And I've been on for over 10 years now. What? Today's topic is what neurodivergent people need to know in relationships. And why I wrote it as that is because a lot of times, as somebody who is potentially, now I've never been diagnosed, but I have a lot of traits. And looking back in my childhood, I think I had a lot of characteristics that would say that I was neurodivergent, but we didn't really get diagnosed back then. So for the sake of argument, I can't say that I am neurodivergent, although I have like a lot of qualities that would be under that category. But technically, I think you have to be diagnosed, right? So we're just going to talk about neurodivergence versus neurotypical, some of the different characteristics that come up in relationship. And we're going to look at how, different communication styles and different things that are helpful to know. Like if you're in a relationship with somebody that's neurodivergent and you're getting frustrated, there may be some helpful things to know or investigate or learn about. Now, to me, and I heard this once from I think it was a comedian or an actress, and it was like one of the best descriptions I've ever heard on what is neurotypical versus neurodivergent. And she's neurodivergent, and she said, it's not like I'm a superhero. Like everybody's like, neurodivergence is a superpower. And she's like, I don't see it that way. She's like, I see it as two different operating systems. One is like Apple, and one is like, whatever the other version is. You got Apple and you got like Samsung or whatever. I don't know. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? And so different operating systems, not one operating system is better than another. They just operate differently. And so if you have ever, owned something that was an Apple product, and then you switch over to say, you go and you get like a Samsung phone from having an iPhone, it's very different. I've even I've had Samsungs forever. And if I went to go get an Apple phone, I would have to learn how to use it. And I've tried to use my friend's Apple phone, and I was just like, I surrender. I know how to touch an app, but things feel different. Even like the capabilities are different. It's just different. So it's not that one's right or wrong. And sometimes there's a learning curve in being able to navigate the new operating system. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who has a different operating system than you, it's good to know how that operating system functions in order for you to have a healthy, happy relationship. And I think for me, growing up, I found myself in a lot of different relationships. And I think my most functional relationships I had were with other people who were neurodivergent. And we didn't use that language then. It was the 90s. We weren't using that language. But I think some of the most easygoing relationships I had were when I was in a relationship with somebody who was neurodivergent. And looking back, I didn't think of them that way. I just thought, oh, like they're more, maybe I would call them like more aloof, or they needed more of their own space, or they, when they had something they were really interested in, like a hyperfixation, they got super interested and like wanted to share everything about that, and it could consume an entire conversation. And I was cool with that because I got that. Like it made sense to me. When people didn't operate that way, I was really confused and would try and figure out, how do I have a relationship with this person? And sometimes it was so confusing that I I landed in ways where I would kind of pretzel myself. And by that I mean like I would twist and turn myself into different configurations to try and find a way to fit into their world to make things work. And then it wouldn't. And then I would just be frustrated and so many things would come up. So you got a different operating system. And I love that that's like how this one person described it. And I don't remember her name. I just came across her on a social media and I thought, oh, that is just so true. That's so it is a different operating system. One of the things I saw also in a post, and this stuff comes up on my feeds all the time because TikTok, I like to think that TikTok knows me better than I know me. Like TikTok puts me into all the anything that has anything to do with sapiosexuals or the LGBTQ and or neurodivergence and all the things that I'm hyper fixated on right now, like ear cleaning videos and pimple popping videos. It directs me to all this stuff, even though when I first got onto TikTok, I wasn't like, hey, put me into the LGBTQ group of every woman over the age of 40 and put me into this group. And now just kind of checks out what you're doing, what you're talking about, because they read everything that and they're probably listening when you're just going to the bathroom too. So, it brought up a lot of videos that I got to see and a lot of different takes on things. And if you are neurodivergent, you're probably getting all the same videos I'm getting. And one of the ones that came across my feed a little while ago, I think it was like so poignantly put out around the different operating systems of how somebody who's neurodivergent would perceive something and how somebody's neurotypical would perceive something. So here's a situation. A neurotypical might invite you to just randomly blurt out in a crowd, having a party on, December 3rd at 4 o'clock. All the neurotypicals in the room will think they're invited and take note and write it down. All the neurodiverse people will not know they're invited because they weren't specifically individually invited. So it's it's not it's not explicitly told to them, so they don't think it's for them. Where a neurotypical thinks they've invited you because they said it out loud to a group, a neurodiverse person will not get that. And so sometimes the feeling of being left out in those situations comes up. It's like, well, you didn't invite me. And they're like, well, I invited everyone. It's like, but you didn't invite me, so I didn't know I was part of everyone. I know it's awkward, but this happens. And I brought this up with a few friends of mine. I'm like, how do you feel about like if somebody randomly says you're invited to a party? How do you react? And they're like, well, I wouldn't be invited because they just invited the whole room. I'm like, right? I hear you. I wouldn't think I was invited either because nobody specifically said, Milica, you're invited to this party. And until I hear that explicitly directed at me, I do not know that it's for me, which is funny because in business, when I'm doing things like marketing, and you're going to invite people into something like, hey, I have a class. What I know is that when I blanket invite people, nobody realizes they're invited because 90% of the people I'm connected with are neurodiverse. And until I specifically invite them, and the ones who will be interested are generally neurodiverse as well, that until I specifically invite them with a, hey, I'd really like you to come to this weekend or this whatever, they have no idea that they're even part of my world or invited or any of it until I specifically invite them. And when I do specifically invite people, then I get people showing up. And when I specifically invite them and give them very specific ground rules, then they're comfortable in showing up. It's like, I'm having an event. It starts at this time on this day. For the first 3 hours, we're doing this. If you don't want to do this, show up the next day when we're going to start with this. This is the price. Now, would you like to come? But if you're neurotypical, you might just be like, find the advertisement on social media and go, oh, that's cool. I'm going to show up to that and think like, of course, it's open to everybody because it's on social media. And I know it sounds cuckoo, but I can't tell you how many people, when I have done mass marketing, because this is what typical marketing will tell you is put it out there, pay for your, do your Facebook marketing and, get your niche down to a certain age and location and blah, blah, blah. No, I have tried that. It is not happening. And when I started to also invite people to come and listen to my show, they started to listen individually. I would tell somebody and then they would tell somebody, and it's like the invitation was what had people listen. So I invite you guys to go invite your friends to tell them about this show. You're more than welcome to go and spread the word and let other people know that this show exists. Happy that you do so. And I have clients who will also ask. I've had this time and again, and I know this is funny, but I will have clients who will specifically say, is it okay if I tell so-and-so about you? Usually those people are neurodivergent because they know in their hearts they need the specific invite. So they want to know, is it okay? Am I breaking a boundary? Can I tell people about you? Now, a neurotypical person won't do that. They'll just go out and do it, and they won't necessarily consider whether you're available or not available. But neurodiverse people will generally ask and see if it's okay. Are they crossing a boundary or what's going on? And it's just, I find those operating systems of our brains fascinating. And had I known this stuff back when I was like a teenager, I think my relationships would have made a heck of a lot more sense to me. But looking back, I have to say I could easily off my hand name the people who are probably neurodiverse because the relationships were so casually funny, and there was just like an understanding, and it didn't get complicated in any way. It's when the relationships were mixed between neurodiverse and neurotypical that's like there was total confusion sometimes uh, around all kinds of things. And we're going to talk about some of the stuff that does often come up, especially in romantic relationships between neurodiverse and neurotypical people, or the beauty of like if you're both neurodiverse, how it can be you can sometimes understand each other in a different way. And or if you're both neurotypical, you can understand each other in a certain way. So sometimes when it's the operating systems are mixed, then it's good to understand how those other operating systems work. So yeah, that's going to be a fun little chat. If you happen to feel like, you know what, this really speaks to me and I'd like to learn more about, being neurodiverse, there are lots and lots of websites out there, guys. There are experts in this field. I am not counting myself as an expert in being neurodiverse because I can't really say that. I've never been diagnosed. And from a perspective of working with couples where I can see that in them, it's more fun for me because I can actually tell when somebody is like, oh, you've got this operating system and you've got this operating system, and what these different operating systems need are different forms of communication in order to feel confident and be able to move forward. And so, sometimes there needs to be very explicit um, communication, like I require A, B, C, and D. And you don't have to assume that your partner should know, because a lot of times if you're neurodiverse, you need to have the specific direction given to you. Like, this is what I need. And then they will either tell you that they can follow through on that or not, and sometimes it can seem frank and sometimes it can feel like off-putting, but there can be some real clarity where I think neurotypical people can sometimes not be as frank, where neurodiverse people can be often a lot more frank about what their needs are. And I watch in my child and their friends, their friend group are very neurodiverse, and they're very frank with each other in terms of like, yeah, today is not my day for seeing people. And there's like no offense taken. It's the coolest thing. There's just, yeah, today's my day off from human beings, and here we go. And I think for people who are maybe neurotypical, they might feel like offended or put off or rejected. But when you're in a group of people who get that and they're like, yeah, I know what that feels like. And there is empathy, which I think there's been a misunderstanding in the past where the idea is if you're neurodivergent, you have no empathy. I think actually what it is you have extreme empathy. In fact, you're feeling everything and everyone all the time. So being able to be really clear with that and be cool with it, and it's like not offensive. So we're going to talk about some different operating systems with neurodiversity and neurotypical stuff in relationships, and we're going to find some fun and easy ways to actually get along and be able to navigate some of the highs and lows of these mixed operating system relationships. So you're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight we are talking about some different operating systems, and what I mean by that is, navigating relationships between neurodiverse and neurotypical people. And so the different operating systems are how our brains function, how we function in the world. And we looked at a bunch of articles today that were both scholarly articles and then extracts from different scholarly articles. And there's a lot of good information out there, guys, for you to check out. And I'm going to bring to you some of the things that I felt were some of the more common themes that I found across many of the different sites that I looked at. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was just the fact that, to not make I think number one is to not make each other's operating system wrong. Like, my way of being is more better than your way of being. I think that's number one key thing. And also one of the things I found exciting was, because I always say this, is communication is key. Well, they also, and every single website has said the same thing. And when communication is key, it's also to be okay with communicating with your words and then explaining how you feel. Sometimes you may not have words for it. So learning more language or new words to describe how you feel can be helpful. And sometimes there's just a bundle of frustration, and it's just like, no words, just And sometimes it just needs like a physical release, whether you're, getting a physical release through masturbation or walking or sports or sweating it out, working it out, whatever it happens to be, whether you're stimming, your body just needs to just stim it out. Any of those work great to help regulate your system and be able to get some of the feelings out that maybe you don't have words for. So one of the things I want to talk about too is I think for years, decades, there has been a complete misunderstanding about people who are neurodiverse, and that the misunderstanding is that people who are neurodiverse don't want, this is the old understanding, that people who are neurodiverse have no empathy, they don't really want relationships, they're not romantically interested, they don't know how to be with people, relationships are not their thing. And that's, everybody has a desire for relationship. It's just that they might not desire it in the same way. Might be more demisexual, where you need to know somebody and get feeling connected to them emotionally before you have sex with them. There might be, maybe even feeling asexual or aromantic, where feelings are different, maybe not so overt or present all the time. They might be there, but they might be slight, and they might not even be there at all. And that's completely normal too. And sometimes when you're neurodiverse, you might use sex as a regulating tool as well. And we talked about that on the show about hypersexuality. So there's a wide range of things that might be occurring. But I think the most misunderstood was as though people who are neurodiverse have no desire for relationship or romantic or sexual or any of that. And that's just not true. I just know way too many neurodiverse people who are interested in relationships. In fact, they almost, in a way, study it. I have to say, like, my mom is neurodiverse, and when she was in high school, somebody asked her who she had a crush on, and it was so funny. And this was a few months ago, or maybe even a year or so ago. She was telling me this story about, well, my roommate asked me who I had a crush on when I was like grade 9 or 10. And I sat and I thought about, like, who's a good person to have a crush on? Well, somebody who's got a good sense of humor, who's intelligent, who's, relatively good looking. So she had figured out and basically concluded through an evaluation who's a good person to have a crush on. It wasn't like a deep sensation feeling of attraction. It was like, what makes the most logical sense? And that's sometimes what happens. And whether my husband will ever admit it or not, it's actually how we ended up in relationship. And he said it in different ways, where he's like, well, you were able to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G really well. And so it just makes sense. I'm like, oh, I just love you for the way your brain operates, because it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm so in love with you. It was different. And I think in that respect, I had total appreciation for it, because I could see that as lasting qualities rather than that I'm so in love with you, which can die off and the passion can burn away. But having somebody who's like, oh, I like these characteristics about you, and this is what I admire about you. I'm like, yes, thank you. These are qualities about me that not only have I nourished, these are ones that I really like about myself. So I really like that you like them, because I'm not planning on changing those. And I think that often will happen in, we'll call it mixed operating system relationships, where, the partners are looking to have both operating systems work the same, and they just won't. And it's okay, right? So don't try to make your neurodiverse partner be neurotypical. It's not going to happen. You're not going to change Android into Apple. You're just not. And what if that's okay? So if you're not going to be able to change your partner, and I'm not saying that you're not, there is always natural change and progression that happens, but their operating systems are going to work a certain way. And what if you can just learn how their system works and not make it feel offensive? Like if you happen to have a partner who is just very frank and overt, it could be part of their operating system. And if they sound like they come across offending people, they, people might get offended, but sometimes it's just that, as if you're neurodiverse, you might say things that you didn't mean to hurt people's feelings. It's just the way that you communicate. And so hopefully, I think people will start to get that it's not about being offensive, and it's also not about having to constantly check on what you can say. Hopefully, I hope we're coming to a time where we can all just show up as who we are and not worry about who are we offending and who are we not offending. And there are times when there's absolute abuse happening. So yeah, that's off the table. But if you're just saying something and maybe you got a word off because you don't know what the new words are, hopefully people don't get fully offended by you. So that can happen when you're just bold and say what comes to mind because you're not trying to filter it. It's not that you can even filter. The frankness just comes out. And for me, when I'm in a group of people, sometimes, quite often, what will happen is I will feel everybody's insecurities. And it's just like a crazy natural skill I have. And whatever somebody is most insecure about, my mouth will not shut up about it. And I have tried over the years to be aware of, oh, I'm saying this, somebody in this room is definitely going to be offended by it. I need to keep myself under check. And sometimes I can do it. Like if I really know it's going to trigger somebody and they're not ready to hear it, I've been able to monitor that in myself. But for a long time, I didn't know how. And it was really hard because I would just randomly offend people and not knowingly offend them quite often, and say things, especially because of my special interest being all about sex. I will say things to people that often offend them around sex, because I can quite often see where their sticky points are, or where by that I mean things that bother them or things that they're hiding from themselves. So, I might randomly be like, hey, thinking about giving that guy a blowjob to some man who's pretending to be really heterosexual in his life, but I saw through that mask. And then he's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I've said some things to people, and luckily I've had some friends who I have said some funny things to that at first were really offended, and then later on in life kind of turned around and went, you remember when you said that thing to me? You were freaking spot on. And it's actually like a hidden thing that I was hiding from myself. It was like a kink that I just didn't want to admit that I had. And I was like, oh boy, yeah, I could see that I would say that. And sometimes I just think, oh, that's really funny thought. I'm going to say that really funny thought. And it's not funny to other people. So I do have to say, I'm trying to keep wrap on that and check in and go, if I say this, will this hurt this person? But guys, it has been an effort. And it can be exhausting. So not everybody wants to put in the effort or knows even how to self-check on that. And sometimes things just become offensive. So it's often not meant to be offensive. It's literally the sense of humor is different, and the frankness is it's bold. It's just there and sometimes not controllable. So yeah, good times. I think it's partly too why I have this show, is just I can rant and go on and go deep dive into little topics and get my fixation on for the week and share it with you guys and talk about that, so that I don't have to say it to my husband for an hour where he's just like, oh my, I'm not interested. Shut up because you're driving me crazy, lady. And I can just say it to you guys, and whoever's interested can listen. And if you're not, then you don't. There you go. And that's the beauty of having your own show. If you happen to be feeling like maybe you're neurodiverse and want to talk about either your hyperfixations or your special interests, having a podcast is awesome. And if you're feeling shy and you want to test it out, there are lots of places where you can become a guest. And if you'd like to be a guest on Inspired Choices Network, you just come over to inspiredchoicesnetwork.com, and we have a thing that you can fill in to say what your special interest is, or what your expertise is, and then you can come on and be a guest. Isn't that cool? Oh my goodness, half the show is over and I'm still talking. What do you know? We're going to head off to our next commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Interested in masturbating for money, copulating for consciousness, and pleasuring on purpose? 21 Days of Sexual Magicism with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic is an exploration of tools, processes, and actions that you can use to create more for your life, your body, your money inflows, and so much more. Graduated learning for all levels of interest. Learn at your own pace via video classes or join the yearly live class. Take a peek at www.milicajelenic.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is the Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight I'm talking about, if you're thinking you might be neurodiverse, or you're neurodiverse and you're in a relationship with somebody who's neurotypical, or you both happen to be neurodiverse, then sometimes just knowing how you operate and how your partner operates can be really helpful. And one of the things that I think comes off at times is that if you are neurodiverse, you might find that some of the ways that neurotypical people have conversations or communicate their ideas can feel like really convoluted. Like, why are you talking around a subject? Why can't you just get direct and just say it as it is? And I get in all kinds of meetings all the time, like whether it's one-on-ones or whether I'm in a group with, like if I'm networking or something. And it's become almost a funny thing because I can hear sexual innuendo in anything. Somebody could tell me that they just wash a can out, and I'll be like, well, I could just turn it into sexual innuendo in a flat second because, it's kind of my thing. It's kind of my special interest. So it's on my brain all the time. And so it's a funny thing to me when people just get scared of things and they have to kind of talk around the subject instead of just getting really bold and right in there and just saying it like it is or how they see it. Or and sometimes people get offended by that too. Like I get on with clients and they might have come to me for, say, for example, well, I recently had a lady come to me who had like a long-term infection. And I think I asked her, like, I was like, yeah, okay, that's all interesting. So tell me about your sex life. Like, where are things going? How do you feel? Like, because there's a connection here. And like, I can find connection in your health to something going on. I can find that. And it's one of the reasons why I started studying sex more and sex and intimacy and got to become a sex and intimacy and relationship coach, is because I was finding so many connections. I could just see them in people and their health and the way that they felt about themselves and how that was reflecting in their health. And I don't know, I see that connection, and maybe one day I will, I don't know, write a PhD in it. But for now, I'm not going to. I'm having too much fun with this show. And frankly, I'm not interested in writing a PhD. It feels like too much effort. So when I'm talking about all things like how do we navigate these relationships? How do we navigate these different operating systems? And that whole thing's getting convoluted and off track. And oftentimes, if you're a little, like, maybe you're ADHD, and sometimes I feel that way too, where you start talking about one thing but it lands you in 55 other directions. If you're with somebody who else has ADHD, can often follow that track. And even if it takes you up through Mongolia and then somehow lands you in Brazil, and you're like, I don't even know how we got here, but we did. You can often follow those trails and tracks. And sometimes if your brain can't like follow those crazy trails, it'll just get frustrated. So if you're neurotypical, you might not be able to follow those trails. If you're neurodiverse, you might want more clarity. And one of the things I highly recommend is, if you are neurodiverse and you don't understand what a neurotypical person is telling you, just be clearly asking, or just say, like, I'm not really clear on this. Can you give me more information? And sometimes it'll frustrate your partner, and sometimes it won't. And sometimes they might not have another way to describe it, especially maybe if they're also neurodiverse. They're just like, I just told you one way, that's the only way I know how to describe it. Then it's like figuring out, sometimes it's like stepping back and seeing, okay, right now neither of us knows how to navigate this conversation, so let's just take 5 minutes away from each other. No offense, there's no offense in this. It's just to clear the systems, like reboot the system and see if we can approach it from a different angle. Sometimes we just got to reboot the systems. It's not that it's changing the system, it's just rebooting it to have a different, more clear way of operating. So yeah, that's how I feel about it. So yeah, sometimes we just need more clarity. And a lot of times too, there's like so many things, like with I think like neurotypical people might give even sexual cues that are less obvious. They might say stuff like, oh, okay, here's a fine example. Like, back in the day, somebody would ask me out for coffee. I literally would go like, I don't drink coffee. And they'd be like, oh, okay. And what I didn't understand was that wasn't what they were actually like asking for. I had to come to realize later that what they were asking for was either like a date or sex. And I didn't realize that until I started watching movies where people would get invited into, oh, you're invited up for coffee, and then coffee equaled sex a lot of the time. And then there's like this, if you don't understand that and you're going up and you're thinking, oh, I'm going up for coffee, I'm having coffee because that was the explicit request, then, and you show up and you're like, oh, wait a second, what was the illicit request? Oh, the illicit request was about sex. But if somebody had just said to you, do you want to come up for sex and coffee? You would be like, I'll have the coffee, but not the sex. Thank you. It's just so much easier when somebody says that. And it's funny because I have had people attracted to me because I am that explicit. And I'll just be like, hey, you interested or not? Like, I'm cool with a no, I'm cool with a yes. Like, what do you feel? So, so it definitely takes away from the trying to navigate and figure out, what does this actually mean? Can't we just like say what it is? And do you want to go out on for watch a movie? No? Okay, cool. Do you want to go do something else? Yes, cool. Here's 5 things I like to do. Is there something you would like to do that are one of those 5 things? And I do think I kind of coach from my own perspective with the way that my operating system works. Of course, that's how coaches work, is from their operating system. So I think sometimes I bring things to the table that are like a mishmash from a whole like different culmination of different things that I've learned, and kind of slap them together to create my own methodology and my own tools. And sometimes we just got to know how how does our partner operate? Do they need us to be blunt and frank? And if you need somebody to say, you know what I really want for Christmas is this, phew, thank you, takes away from the guessing game. Because for me, I am not skilled at buying presents. I no, I have bought some real silly, weird things, and I will just see them and I'm like, hey, this is fun. Like, I think when I was about 18 or 19, I got my grandma a necklace that was bubbles, but my grandma was neurodiverse too. Also, not, I'm sure my grandma and grandpa were neurodiverse, but again, none of us had any diagnosis, so I can't be sure. But my grandma was stoked to have bubbles, which was cool. But had I given those bubbles to somebody else's grandma, they would have been like, "What are you giving me bubbles for? This is weird." But I was gifting the inner child, which I also did like weird gifts to my grandpa, to his inner child. And I tend to gift people's inner child rather than their adult self. And so and I'm not really good at, it's Christmas, so I'm going to buy you a present. I'm not really good at that. I'm much better at, oh, I saw this. It reminds me of something goofy about you. So here, I'm entertaining your inner child and I got you this weird thing. And sometimes I'm right on the mark and sometimes I'm right off the mark. But yeah, and I'm grateful that in my relationship with my husband, he's not such a present person either. Like, he's not really about buying presents. So I'm not stressed about trying to like, oh, you got me a present, so I owe you a present. Because that's logic, and that's maybe how that's how we think the world works, because this is how we see society work. You gave me a present, so I have to give you a present. But the stress when you're neurodiverse to have to buy a present because it's the season of a present is like, whoa. Can I just buy you something when I see something that inspires me? Because that excites me way more than feeling like the pressure of having to do that. So relationships can feel strange at times or unfulfilling because maybe your love languages aren't being fulfilled, but knowing your love languages can really help to, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, because they can help you be able to say what your needs are and get clear on that. It's like, if you really need presence to feel loved, then not only can you say, I need presence, but here are my special interests. And if you get me anything in my special interests or my hyperfixation, I'm going to be thrilled. So it's really cool if you know certain things. And it also is really cool in that you can feel like your partner is listening and knows you. It's like, oh, I really know you're into Star Wars, so I got you this Star Wars thing. Or, I know you have a crazy thing for whatever it happens to be. Like, we watch a lot of sci-fi in this house, so it's pretty much, you could get anything sci-fi for any of us and we'll be like, OMG, it's this character, we love it, woo. Yeah. And so if you know that about somebody, you can get fun and weird things that match their interests, and they'll be excited. And sometimes that pressure of, oh, it's a holiday and I have to buy something, ends up getting you to buy the weirdest things that make no sense, and it's awkward. And also, from a kid perspective, I remember being little and like having to make my Santa list, and I didn't even half the time know what I wanted until the year Cabbage Patch Kids came out. And I still have my Cabbage Patch Kid, who is now 41, and I have many actually, because they're Cabbage Patch Kids, so I got a lot. And they that year I knew what I wanted, and there was a year that I was absolutely hyper fixated on a specific toy that came out that was called the Family Tree Tot House, or at least that's what I called it. And if I didn't have that in my life, if that hadn't showed up for Christmas, I probably would have had either not talked for months, or I would have had a flipping conniption. I needed that Family Tree Tot House so bad that when I was like 6 or 7 and that Family Tree Tot House somehow disappeared, it was brutal. I also had like a fixation on my blankie, and I loved the texture of it. And when that got taken away from me at like the age of 2 or 3, I went mute for a week. I just didn't talk at all. And luckily my grandpa was a doctor. He's dead now, but he was a doctor, and he explained to my parents that I needed my blankie back. Not only did I need it back, I needed it back and smelly, the way I had made it dirty and smelly, and smelling like me, but also like dirty, because that's how I liked it. And then I was better and I could talk. So sometimes these things are important, the textures and the smells. And for me, smells are super important, and textures too. So if you know these things about your partner, it can be really helpful, because you can work with them in what works for them, right? So if you like know your partner can't stand the feeling of sand, for example, you're not going to create a holiday where they're going to have to walk on sand all the time, because that would just be cruel. But if you know that they, for example, love water, then you might take them somewhere that has like a giant wave pool so they can enjoy water with no sand. Do you kind of get where I'm getting at? Yeah. Know your partner. It's really helpful. Whether it's their special interests or their hyperfixations, it's really helpful. If you're neurotypical and you're trying to navigate your relationship, and I say navigate because I think it's you're navigating a new operating system, learning how to use it. So I'm calling it navigating. It can be really helpful in listening, knowing these things, and then bringing them into the relationship. Having something in common is also really helpful. So finding something that is a common interest. So like I was saying, in this house, sci-fi is a common interest. So it's something that we can all bond over, is different crazy kooky things like Doctor Who or Star Trek, or literally anything that is alien related. We're in, and that's good times. So some things, oh my goodness, I only have 7 minutes left. What's going on? Am I supposed to go to break? I think I'm supposed to go to break. Okay, I'm going to head to break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and I'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. So I found some pretty kind of concise descriptions, which I thought felt relatable. So I wanted to bring them up. And so there are some characteristics that were brought up around how a neurodiverse partner might feel in relationship. And one of them is feeling frustrated because society doesn't accommodate the needs of the person who's neurodiverse. So I can totally see that, because we have a lot of things like environmental factors that are overstimulating where other people might not get it. It's like, oh, that smell it just set me off, or that the lighting or the noise, it can feel like, oh, things that are like average to other people can be incredibly overstimulating to somebody who's neurodiverse. And that can lead to like feeling really frustrated and overwhelmed and not really knowing what to do. So it can take a little time, and often, practice and learning how to navigate these things, not to mask them, but to know like, okay, I'm in a situation where I just want to cry because I feel overstimulated. And if other people look at me like I'm wacky because I'm crying, well, that's their thing. They can look at me like I'm wacky because I'm crying, whatever. And sometimes it takes a while to be okay with just showing up as you and having your feelings publicly, and not feeling like you're wrong and you have to change them or make other people feel comfortable because you're crying and they feel uncomfortable. So they're trying to stop. No, you're just crying. It's okay. Just cry. So it's okay to just show up as you, and you don't have to change you. And sometimes just a good cry helps shift the energy and feel less overwhelmed, and not have to, stop the crying. Just let your body experience it, or maybe some stimming, because you got to get it out, get the feelings out. It's okay. I think a lot of dances have been created by people who are just stimming away. Probably Elvis, and his hip thrusting. Maybe that was actually some stimming. I don't know. I'm just, bringing things up. So the feeling overwhelmed, sometimes too, the feeling of exhaustion, because always masking to try and make things work, or to fit in, or figure out what the appropriate behavior is, can be really tiring, especially in social situations where like you don't know the people, so you're not sure how to behave. So you're like, I'm good, look at me, I don't have 35 special interests and want to talk about penguins for the next 10 hours, I'm good. So but yeah, when you actually like are free to roam and show up as yourself, it can be so freeing and way less tiring. So if you feel like tired all the time, that doesn't mean that you're neurodiverse, but if you have some of these other traits and qualities, it might be something to look into. It could just be part of who you are. And what if it's okay to not mask? What's okay, just show up as you are. If people don't like you, they don't like you. There are loads of people in the world who are going to like you just for who you are, all your interesting, fun quirks that you've got. And, one of the other things is like sometimes getting anxious around situations can be the overstimulation, but other situations, and just needing to feel like reassured that it's okay. If you're anxious, it's okay. There's lots going on here. So if you are, a partner or family member of somebody who has a lot of anxiety, I also find that some of the anxiety is sometimes super empathy. So checking in, just seeing like, wow, where did that feeling come from? It feels like it slapped me out of nowhere. And sometimes that feeling of being slapped out of nowhere is literally like somebody else's energy. So just checking is like, just check in on yourself and go, is any of this mine? Or is this somebody else's? Like, can I give it back to them? It's like dirty underwear. Oh, this is not mine. Take back your dirty underwear. Thank you so much. Do some breathing techniques. Sometimes, breath work can help. Sometimes you need different aids. Like sometimes you need things that are going to help your nervous system, like medication. But a lot of times you can navigate this stuff with different tools like breathing techniques and body movement and getting some trauma out too can help. Somatic work can be helpful. So there's lots of ways to navigate it, but just know, what I really wanted to come across on this is that they're just different operating systems, guys. There's not one better way or another, and just learn how each other's operating systems work. You don't have to.
Thank you for listening to The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. The Pleasure Zone returns next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in to your body.